Put your hands where I can see them. Now! The night air pulsed with the flickering of red and blue lights, painting the dark asphalt in an eerie glow. Officer Bradley's voice thundered across the empty street, his Glock locked onto the man standing in front of him. A tall, imposing black man in a crisp military uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons and medals. But Bradley wasn't concerned with that. He saw only a threat. "I said get on the ground." Bradley roared again, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. The man didn't flinch, didn't move. His broad shoulders remained squared, his expression unreadable, his gaze steady and controlled. The kind of gaze that made Bradley's stomach twist in unease. "You're making a serious mistake, officer," the man said finally, his voice deep and composed, carrying the weight of authority. Bradley's sneer deepened. He wasn't about to let some smug black guy talk down to him like that. "The only mistake here is you thinking you're above the law." The man remained still, his presence alone unsettling. The weight of the onlookers' stares pressed against Bradley. Phones were raised, cameras rolling. Every move he made was being recorded, but that only fueled his anger. Before the man could respond, Bradley lunged forward, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back. He shoved the man forcefully against the hood of the black SUV, the impact making a dull thud in the silence. The crowd gasped, murmuring in disbelief. The man didn't resist. He allowed himself to be manhandled, his face calm, his breathing steady. But there was something about the way he stood, the way he allowed it to happen, that made Bradley uneasy. He pulled out his cuffs and snapped them tight around the man's wrists, leaning in close. "You think you're tough?" Bradley sneered. "We'll see how tough you are when you're in a holding cell." The man exhaled slowly, almost as if amused. "What's the charge, officer?" Bradley tightened his grip. "How about resisting arrest? Driving a stolen vehicle? Or just looking suspicious in the wrong neighborhood?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. The tension thickened, growing heavier with every second. Bradley ignored the stares, the whispers, the way the onlookers shook their heads in disgust. This was his town, his authority, and no self-important black man was going to challenge that. Then came the sirens. Another squad car screeched to a stop, and Sergeant Torres stepped out. The moment his eyes landed on the man in cuffs, his face drained of color. He rushed forward, his boots pounding the pavement. "What the hell are you doing?" Torres barked, his voice tight with panic. Bradley frowned. "Just detaining a suspect." Torres's eyes darted between Bradley and the man in cuffs. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "You absolute idiot." Bradley scoffed. "Excuse me?" Torres took a step closer, his voice low but furious. "Do you even know who this is?" Bradley rolled his eyes, still gripping the cuffs. "Some guy named Dawson." Torres exhaled sharply, his hands shaking slightly as he gestured to the crowd, the cameras, the flashing lights. Then, turning to Bradley, he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Not just some guy. General Harold Dawson, 4-star General of the United States Army." The weight of those words hit Bradley like a sledgehammer to the chest. The crowd gasped. Murmurs turned into outright disbelief. Someone in the back shouted, "He arrested a U.S. Army general." Dawson remained silent, his expression unreadable. He had said nothing, done nothing, but the very weight of his presence was suffocating Bradley now. Bradley's grip loosened involuntarily. His mouth went dry. His pulse pounded in his ears. A 4-star general? The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. Dawson slowly turned his head, his eyes locking onto Bradley's. There was no anger, no fear, just the unsettling, quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly how this was about to unfold. Bradley swallowed hard. Who are you calling?" Dawson's lips curled into the slightest smirk. "The Pentagon." The world seemed to tilt. Bradley's stomach dropped. Before he could react, before he could process the catastrophic mistake he had just made, Dawson spoke again. "And I suggest you start thinking about your next career move, Officer Bradley." Bradley felt his knees go weak. Bradley's grip on the cuffs tightened instinctively, but his hands were clammy. His mind raced. A 4-star general. A man with direct access to the highest levels of military power. And he had just slammed him onto the hood of his car in front of a dozen recording phones. A muscle in his jaw twitched. No, he couldn't afford to look weak now. "I don't care who you are," he snapped. "You're under arrest." Dawson let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, officer," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You really should care." Before Bradley could respond, Dawson took a deep breath and, with an eerie sense of patience, spoke into the night air. Patch me through to the Secretary of Defense. The words sent a jolt of electricity through the gathering crowd. Even Sergeant Torres took a step back. Bradley's heart pounded against his ribcage as he glanced at the handcuffed man in front of him. Was he bluffing? There was no way a simple phone call could. A voice crackled through the radio on Dawson's shoulder. "General Dawson, sir. Are you in distress?" The voice was sharp, professional, and immediately alert. Bradley's blood turned to ice. "Affirmative," Dawson said coolly. "I'm currently detained by an officer who has no idea what he's just done. I need a direct line to the Pentagon. Now." The static silence that followed felt like a vice tightening around Bradley's throat. A few agonizing seconds later, a new voice, this one deep and authoritative, came through. "General Dawson, this is Secretary Monroe. What's your situation?" Torres inhaled sharply. The crowd collectively tensed. Bradley felt his world tilt. The Secretary of Defense was on the line. "Right now. Situation is as follows," Dawson said, his voice clipped professional. "I have been wrongfully detained, physically assaulted, and humiliated in public by an officer who failed to recognize both my identity and his jurisdiction. I want immediate intervention. And I want repercussions." Bradley's stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't just bad. This was career-ending. Maybe even life-ruining. The radio crackled again. "Understood, General. Do you require military police support?" Dawson's lips curled into a small smirk. "That depends," he said, turning his gaze back to Bradley. "Will Officer Bradley be wise enough to correct his mistake?" Every set of eyes in the crowd was now glued to the scene unfolding before them. Bradley's breath came in short, shallow bursts. His arrogance had fueled this entire situation, and now it was crumbling around him like a house of cards. "Aye," Bradley swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temple. His mind spun, desperately searching for a way out of the nightmare he had created. He could try to justify his actions, but against this man? Against this level of power? He was outmatched in every possible way. Before he could gather his words, the wail of approaching sirens pierced the air. Multiple black SUVs screeched to a halt, their doors swinging open in unison. Armed men in tactical gear poured out, their weapons lowered, but their presence undeniable. "General Dawson," one of them called out. "We're here under direct orders. Are you unharmed?" Dawson turned his attention to the arriving forces, his expression cool. "I'm fine, but I expect full documentation of this encounter." One of the men nodded, a camera in hand already rolling. Bradley's stomach plummeted further. Every second of this was being recorded. Dawson turned back to Bradley. "Last chance, officer," he said smoothly. "Undo these cuffs." Bradley's mouth went dry. He fumbled for his keys, hands shaking, as he unlocked the cuffs with a loud click. Dawson pulled his hands forward, rubbing his wrists before adjusting his uniform. The subtle power shift in the air was suffocating. Dawson exhaled and took a slow step forward, bringing himself inches from Bradley's face. "Tell me, Officer Bradley," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, but laced with lethal authority. "What do you think happens next?" Bradley opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could feel Torres' burning stare drilling into the side of his head. The crowd was silent, waiting. Dawson didn't need a response. He already knew. Turning away, he adjusted his uniform, then reached for the radio clipped to one of the arriving officers' vests. "Get me a direct line to the mayor's office," he said. "I believe it's time we have a conversation about the people they hire to protect and serve." Bradley's vision swam. If Dawson was calling the mayor, this wasn't just going to be a suspension. This was going to be destruction. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, one of the men from the SUVs stepped forward, holding out a sleek tablet. "General, the Pentagon requests a secure video feed. The president would like a word." Bradley's breath caught in his throat. Dawson arched an eyebrow, taking the tablet with casual ease. "Ah," he murmured, looking at the screen. "Perfect timing." Then, locking eyes with Bradley one last time, he smirked. "Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes." Bradley felt his knees buckle slightly as he watched General Dawson take the tablet, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. The words still echoed in his head. The president would like a word. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out the murmurs from the gathering crowd. His career, his entire future, now dangled by a thread that Dawson held effortlessly in his grasp. "Mr. President," Dawson said, his tone neutral but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You're seeing this in real time, I presume?" Bradley could barely breathe. "The president is watching this? Right now?" He felt a cold sweat break out along his back. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. This was a national crisis unfolding before his very eyes. Through the stillness, Dawson's voice carried with commanding authority. "Yes, sir, I agree. Completely unacceptable." Bradley swallowed hard. He was done. Torres, standing beside him, was rigid, her jaw clenched. She had understood what was happening the moment Dawson made that call. Unlike Bradley, she had the sense to recognize when a situation was beyond saving. But for him, this wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was a reckoning. Dawson finally lowered the tablet, exhaling sharply. He turned back to Bradley, but now there was something almost pitying in his gaze. That, more than anything, sent a fresh wave of dread crawling up Bradley's spine. "I just had a very interesting conversation," Dawson said, stepping closer. "Turns out, the commander-in-chief himself is rather invested in how our military personnel are treated on home soil." He tilted his head. "Would you like to guess what his response was?" Bradley didn't dare answer. His throat had locked up completely. Dawson's smirk deepened. "He's sending a federal investigation team," he said coolly, "to ensure that this incident," he gestured toward the recording bystanders, the tactical officers still watching intently, "gets the national attention it deserves." Bradley's stomach dropped. A federal investigation? Torres finally broke her silence. "Sir," she said carefully, looking at Dawson, "with all due respect, this doesn't have to escalate further." Dawson turned his piercing gaze toward her, his expression unreadable. "Escalate," he repeated. "Sergeant, this man just detained a decorated four-star general, threw him onto a car like a common criminal, and ignored every warning sign before humiliating me in front of the entire country. Tell me, at what point did this not escalate?" Torres hesitated, but she had no argument. She knew, just as well as everyone else, that Bradley had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Bradley tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. "General, I didn't realize." Dawson held up a hand, silencing him. "Of course you didn't," he said sharply. "You didn't care to. And now," he exhaled, shaking his head, "now you're going to learn what happens when power is abused." At that moment, another set of vehicles screeched to a stop. These weren't local police. These were federal agents, their badges glinting under the streetlights as they stepped out with precision and purpose. One of them, a woman in a crisp black suit, approached Dawson and gave him a firm nod. "General, we've been briefed. Orders from the White House are clear. This officer is to be taken into federal custody immediately." Bradley felt all the air rush out of his lungs. Federal custody? His knees nearly buckled. He had expected a reprimand, a suspension, even termination. But this was beyond his worst fears. "Wait," he stammered, stepping back instinctively. You can't just arrest me." The agent barely spared him a glance. "Officer Bradley, you are being detained for violating federal military protection laws and for the wrongful detainment and assault of a senior U.S. official." She nodded to her team. "Cuff him." No, wait." Bradley stumbled back, but hands were already grabbing him, forcing him to turn as cold metal snapped around his wrists. His own cuffs. The irony was suffocating. The crowd erupted into a flurry of murmurs, some even cheering as cameras continued rolling. The once powerful officer, who had strutted around with arrogance just moments ago, was now being hauled away like a criminal. Dawson watched him impassively, arms crossed. Torres looked on, her expression unreadable. But just as Bradley was being shoved toward the awaiting black vehicle, Dawson's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, his expression shifting slightly. A name flashed across the screen. The Secretary of Homeland Security. Dawson's smirk returned as he answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." Bradley barely had time to register those words before the car door slammed shut, sealing his fate. Dawson kept the phone pressed to his ear, his expression remaining unreadable as the voice of the Secretary of Homeland Security filled the line. The tension in the air was suffocating, with every set of eyes in the vicinity locked on the four-star general, waiting for his reaction. "General Dawson," the authoritative voice on the other end spoke firmly. "We have a situation. The White House is now directly involved, and we need you to remain on site. There's more at play here than just a wrongful detainment. This goes deeper." Dawson's grip tightened around the phone as he took a measured breath. "I understand, Madam Secretary. What exactly am I looking at?" A brief silence. Then her voice dropped lower. "We believe Officer Bradley wasn't acting alone. There may be orders involved, directed at you." Dawson's jaw clenched. "Orders?" His eyes flickered back toward Bradley, who was now slumped in the back of the federal vehicle, his face ashen and drenched in sweat. The man looked broken, but something about his expression, something flickering behind his wide, fearful eyes, sent an unsettling chill through Dawson's veins. He knew something. Dawson turned slightly, his gaze shifting to Torres, who had stepped forward, her stance tense. "Sergeant," Dawson said, lowering the phone for a moment. "How long has Bradley been on the force?" Torres hesitated before answering. 6 years, sir. Came in with a lot of aggression, but always had someone looking out for him." Dawson narrowed his eyes. "Who?" Torres exhaled sharply, lowering her voice. "The commissioner." A deadly silence followed. Dawson exchanged a look with the federal agent beside him, whose expression darkened at the implication. If the police commissioner was involved, this situation wasn't just about one racist cop abusing his authority. This was systemic. And now, with the White House directly involved, the stakes had just skyrocketed. Dawson lifted the phone back to his ear. "Madam Secretary, I believe you're right. Something bigger is happening here. I need immediate clearance to speak to the president again." "Granted," she responded without hesitation. "But General, be careful. If what we suspect is true, then this isn't just about a traffic stop gone wrong. This is a power play, and you're the target." Dawson's blood ran cold. He ended the call, inhaling sharply before turning back toward the vehicle. He stalked forward, signaling for the agents to hold as he pulled open the door. Bradley flinched, his eyes darting around frantically. "You screwed up," Dawson said, his voice dangerously low. "But I get the feeling you're more afraid of something else than you are of me." Bradley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I don't know what you're talking about." Dawson leaned in, lowering his voice so that only Bradley could hear. "You were so confident, so damn arrogant. Until that phone call changed everything. Someone promised you protection, didn't they? But now, you're realizing they're about to cut you loose." Bradley's breathing quickened, his panic rising. I can't." Dawson cut him off, his tone cold. "Tell me who gave you the order. Because right now you have about 2 options. You talk and maybe you get witness protection, or you stay quiet and take the fall alone. And trust me, they will let you rot." Bradley squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. His entire body was trembling now. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You have no idea what you're up against." Dawson studied him for a long moment before stepping back. He didn't need to hear more. Because now he knew. This wasn't about Bradley. This was about something bigger. And if what Bradley was implying was true, then someone powerful, wanted Dawson out of the way. But why? Dawson turned to the federal agents. "Take him to an isolated holding facility. No press, no outside communication. If he's right, then he's in more danger than we thought." The agent nodded, signaling for the team to move out. Bradley was hauled from the vehicle, his face pale as he was led away. Torres stepped up beside Dawson. "Sir, what the hell is going on?" Dawson exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I need to find out before it's too late." Just then, Dawson's phone vibrated again. Another call. But this time, the name on the screen sent a chilling wave through his chest. Unknown caller. Dawson's gut twisted. He hesitated for a moment before answering. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "General Dawson, you should have just taken the arrest quietly." His blood turned to ice. Dawson's grip on the phone tightened. The distorted voice on the other end sent a chill through his spine. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. A low, distorted chuckle came through the line. "You should have just taken the arrest quietly, General. Now, you've made things complicated." Dawson's eyes darkened. "Who are you working for?" A pause. Then the voice dropped lower. "You're a man of intelligence, Dawson. I'm sure you've figured that out by now. But I'll tell you this isn't about you. This is about control. And you, General, have stepped into a game where the stakes are far higher than you realize." Dawson's jaw clenched. He turned away from the agents, lowering his voice. "You think you can intimidate me? You think I don't know how these power plays work? Whoever you are, you made a mistake targeting me." Another chuckle. Brave words for a man who doesn't realize how deep he's in. "Walk away, Dawson. Drop this, or there won't be a Pentagon left to call." Before Dawson could respond, the line went dead. He exhaled sharply, staring at the phone in his hand. His mind was racing. Whoever was behind this wasn't just some corrupt officer or city official. This was something bigger. This was orchestrated. And they had just threatened the Pentagon. Torres approached cautiously, reading the tension on his face. "Sir? What's going on?" Dawson pocketed his phone, his face unreadable. "We need to move now. Secure Bradley and get me direct access to the president." Torres nodded, barking orders to the team. As the agents moved, Dawson's mind worked rapidly. If they were threatening him at this level, it meant they were desperate. And desperate men made mistakes. As they reached the armored vehicle, another black SUV screeched to a stop across the street. Dawson's instincts flared. Something was wrong. The door to the SUV swung open, and before anyone could react, a masked figure stepped out. With a rifle. "Get down!" Dawson roared just as gunfire erupted. Glass shattered as bullets tore through the air. Agents dove for cover, returning fire in rapid bursts. Dawson grabbed Torres, pulling her behind the vehicle as chaos erupted. Bradley, still restrained, screamed as a bullet ricocheted off the pavement inches from him. The agents attempted to move him to cover, but the masked assailant was relentless. Dawson reached for his sidearm, steadying his breath. He peeked around the edge of the SUV, locking eyes with the shooter. And that's when he saw it. A police badge, glinting under the streetlight, clipped to the shooter's belt. Dawson's stomach turned. This wasn't a random hit. This was a cleanup job. A shot rang out, and Dawson barely ducked in time as a bullet skimmed past his shoulder. The gunfire was deafening, but through the chaos, he saw movement. Another vehicle, pulling up behind the shooter. More men. More badges. Torres cursed under her breath. "Sir, we're surrounded." Dawson's mind raced. He had two options, stand and fight, or retreat and regroup. But then his phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. Another unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Dawson," the voice on the other end said urgently. "Get out of there. Now. You have a mole in your team." Dawson's breath caught. Dawson's heart pounded as he gripped his phone tighter. A mole? His eyes darted across the chaos. Gunfire, shouting, agents taking cover. But who among them had betrayed him? Torres fired back at the masked gunman, barely ducking behind the SUV as another round of bullets ricocheted off the pavement. "Sir, we're pinned down. We need to move now." Dawson scanned the street, calculating his next move. Then his gaze landed on Agent Daniels. Something was off. Unlike the others, Daniels wasn't firing back. He was inching away, toward the other side of the SUV. Toward the shooters. Dawson's eyes narrowed. The mole. Without hesitation, he pivoted and tackled Daniels to the ground. The agent yelped in surprise as Dawson wrenched his firearm away and pressed a knee to his chest. "Who sent you?" Dawson growled, pressing the barrel against his temple. Daniels' eyes darted wildly. I don't know what you're talking about." But Dawson didn't have time for lies. He reached into Daniels' jacket, yanking out a burner phone and a folded piece of paper. One glance at the paper, and his blood ran cold. It was a list of names, government officials, military personnel, all marked for elimination. And his name was at the very top. Daniels seized the moment, twisting violently beneath Dawson, but the general was faster. With a swift strike, he knocked Daniels unconscious. Torres rushed over. "Sir, we need to go. Backup is en route." Dawson nodded, gripping the list tightly. This wasn't just about him. This was bigger than he had imagined. Suddenly, the masked gunman, realizing his mission had failed, made a desperate move. He threw a grenade. Dawson's instincts kicked in. Everyone down. The explosion rocked the street, sending debris flying. Dawson and Torres barely managed to dive behind cover as the blast shook the ground. When the smoke cleared, the masked shooter was gone, vanished into the night. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup had arrived. SWAT teams flooded the scene, securing the area and taking Daniels into custody. Dawson stood, dusting off his uniform, eyes set in cold determination. This wasn't over. Not even close. Moments later, his phone rang again. This time, it was an official line. A calm but firm voice spoke. "General Dawson, the president is expecting your call." Dawson exhaled slowly. He glanced at the wreckage around him, at his battered agents, at the list in his hand. Then, with deliberate precision, he answered, "Patch me through." Torres stepped beside him, eyes filled with unspoken questions. "What now, sir?" Dawson's jaw tightened. "Now. We end this." As the call connected, he straightened his back, his uniform still bearing the dust of battle, and spoke with the authority of a man who had just been pushed too far. "This is General Dawson. We have a national security threat. I need full authorization to handle it immediately." Silence on the other end. Then a single response. "You have it." Dawson turned to Torres, his eyes sharp with determination. "Let's go." As they moved, his voice carried through the night, powerful, unwavering, and filled with righteous fury. A racist cop arrested a Black U.S. Army general until he made one call to the Pentagon. What would you have done in General Dawson's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think justice was served? Let us know below. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. Subscribe now and turn on notifications.